I think one of the most important tips for me freshman year was to do my homework at a place that wasn't my dorm room, which meant either going to the library or going to the Learning Commons. But if I was in my dorm room, I was distracted, I would pick up my phone too much, but going somewhere else really was helpful to just get it all done at once.
Second of our 4-part series for FYE. Today we're going to be talking about creative ways to study. If you don't already have a pen and paper out, I would encourage you to take some notes. I guarantee there's probably something new you're going to learn today that you might be able to implement. So let's talk about effective versus ineffective study. What's the number one way most college students study? Rereading the textbook over and over. What's the most ineffective way to study? Aimlessly, passively rereading the textbook over and over again. No, I am not telling you not to read your textbooks. I would never say that. But what I am saying is if you need to read them actively and you need to engage with the material in other ways. Okay? So let's talk about how to get the most out of class prior to going to class. So I want to give you an analogy. I would never walk into a movie theater and randomly choose a theater to walk into and not even know what movie I'm going to see. But some of you may treat class like that and have no idea what your professor is going to talk about today. And that puts you at a distinct disadvantage over the person sitting next to you who may have come with more preparedness. So how do you prepare for class? You don't have to do much, but 5 to 10 minutes can actually give you a distinct advantage. So if your professor is lecturing from a book and you know that tomorrow he is lecturing from chapter 6, then either tonight or tomorrow before you go to class, you want to at least read the headings and the subheadings from chapter 6 and any vocabulary words that are in it as well. Anything that might be at the end of the chapter, review questions or whatever. Will you understand it? No, because you haven't actually read the chapter yet. But at least you will have been exposed to the content a little bit. Exposure is an educational word that we use to mean the incrementally introducing of material to students. So you were introduced to geometry actually in preschool and all through elementary school, long before you got to high school. And it's that same idea. So skim the headings of the chapters, go to the end of the chapter, preview that material before you go to class. Get a feel for what the sections are about, even if it doesn't make sense to you yet. And if your professor happens to give you notes or PowerPoints or something ahead of time, make sure you read them. That will help frame it and put it in so much context. They're doing that for you as a favor, and for you not to take advantage of that is putting yourself at a disadvantage. So let's talk about after class. After class, you want to review your notes from lecture the very same day. Not on Saturday, the same day. Try to fill in any gaps in your notes while the stuff may still be in your short-term memory. And then I would also recommend take handwritten notes and then retype them. The reason for that is there is no muscle memory involved in keyboarding, but there is muscle memory involved in handwriting. And so you will help encode those things in your memory or begin to do so by doing handwritten notes. But then you want to organize your notes by retyping them the same day and organizing them in more of an outline form, and then printing out the notes that you have organized and retyped. Textbook reading tips. Okay, read backwards. Yes, I want you to go to the end of the chapter first. When you're ready to sit down and engage with it, this is always where you want to start. You want to start by reviewing any list of vocabulary, any questions that are at the end, a chapter summary. And then you want to skim the chapter looking for those things and looking for the big ideas. It's a good idea to make an outline of the chapter. You can do that just basically by using the headings and the subheadings. That's basically an outline. When you skim, look for the question being answered by the author. If making an outline sounds like torture to you, think of it this way. Every chapter is basically a question being posed by the author and being answered. They may not use a question mark, they may not use question words, but that's the essence of it. So ask yourself, what is the question and answer in this chapter? And then also make notes while you're reading. Write down questions. See if you can find the answers yourself or ask your professor the next time. Make pencil check marks next to the important things. Come back to those. Newsflash. Not every paragraph is as important as each other. So some of them are more important and contain more important information than others. And so mark those. Learn to think like your professor and ask yourself, if I were writing a test over this passage, What would I include on it? What's most important? If you start thinking that way, you'll learn to pick out the important things. And then a word about highlighting. Never highlight until you've actually read the entire chapter and understand it well. Some of you highlight when you're reading for the very first time, and that's actually a very ineffective way to study. The research doesn't say a lot of good things about highlighting as an effective study tool, but what it does say is you shouldn't highlight until you know the chapter and know that you're highlighting something that's actually important to it. So before a study session, ask yourself, what am I learning? So if you're sitting down for between your 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock class and you have an hour gap and you're in the library, you should know more than just, I'm going to study for World Civ today. You should know exactly how you're going to study for World Civ. Are you writing out the answers to the review questions at the end of the chapter? Are you outlining the chapter? Are you making flashcards of the vocabulary? Are you writing yourself a practice test? How are you going to engage with the material from that class? And then also, it's a good idea to figure out what category your study session falls into. Does it fall into facts or concepts? Okay, so a fact is, what is the name of this bone in my upper arm? Well, it's the humerus, right? But a concept would be, what is the function? Mineral storage, connectivity, movement, support, connecting the radius and the ulna. Those would be the concepts, okay? Most people tend to try to learn the facts before they learn the concept. And I would suggest that you try to learn the concept and then the fact, okay? Then you can examine the relationship between the concept and the facts.
One thing that I would probably tell a freshman to do, and I was told as a freshman, is to study 2 hours for every hour you're in class, and that really helped me in all my classes, just kind of stay focused and have a good study schedule. So that was what really helped me.
Using online flashcards and Kahoot and Quizlet are popular at Bethel. I would encourage you to try this one, Anki or Anki, however you say that. That is one that uses the principle of spaced repetition, which is a much better way to learn and encode those things in your memory. Key points for using flashcards. Make your own. Handwritten is really best, but if you're not going to make handwritten ones, then electronic ones are definitely better than nothing. But make your own. Mix pictures and words. You exponentially increase the effectiveness of the flashcard if you do silly pictures in that will trigger your brain. It doesn't matter if you are the worst artist in the world, like me, and nobody else would be able to look at that card and tell that you drew a bird. That's okay. You're the only one who has to see this. Make sure that you only have one concept per card, okay? Because otherwise you can trick your brain if you've got 4 bullet points on the back and you were only able to remember 3 of them, but you turned it over and recognized that 4th one you couldn't pull out, then your brain says, oh, I knew that. Well, it really didn't. It just recognized it. It didn't retrieve it or recall that piece of information. So, one concept per card. Don't try to do the entire periodic table of elements on one card. Maybe just the noble gases, if that. Say your answers out loud before you flip it over and check yourself. And then study from both sides of the card, because who knows how your professor is going to phrase the question. If you only can come at it from the definition, then you're going to be in trouble if they ask it from the term itself. Okay, let's talk about some memory and recall tricks. Acronyms like Roy G. Biv. Remember the visible light spectrum? So we're going to go back to elementary school in some of these just to give you a real easy, simplistic way to think about using your memory as making tricks. So Roy G. Biv, the visible light spectrum. Another example would be memorizing the planets. Okay, so Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. Let's say I had to diagram those on a test, for example. Probably not at college, probably 6th grade, but anyhow, how I would do that is, let's say I know all the names of them, but I can't put them in order necessarily. So I would take the first letter of each word, so M for Mercury, V for Venus, E for Earth, etc., and I would come up with a silly saying that I can remember the sequence of that will help trigger that for me. So instead of Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, M, V, E, M, I would come up with my, M, very, V, early, E, mother, M. My very early mother just sat upon 9 planets. Bingo, I just memorized the sequence of it by that silly phrase. Okay, coined sayings are also really good, especially rhyming ones. Like in 1804, Lewis and Clark went out to explore. George Washington was feeling fine until he died in 1799. It's not limited to history, but it's really good for dates, but you can also do it for other things. So for example, 3 times 7 is lots of fun, 3 times 7 is 21. Obviously we're not learning our times tables in college, but you get the idea. Also, music associations are very, very powerful. This is great, especially for nursing and for anatomy. There's all kinds of YouTube videos out there. I found one a couple years ago that does the sequence of the metacarpals, the bones of the hand, and it set it to a parody of an old Beatles song. So it's really cute. But there's all kinds of stuff like that out there on YouTube. And then I want to tell you how to reproduce a chart or a graph from memory, because you will probably have to do that at some point. So the way that you do that is study it in your book for about 5 minutes and look at it. Examine where the different things on the chart are spatially in terms of their relationship to each other. Look at the letters and the words, say them out loud, try to differentiate between them, and then close your book, take a blank piece of paper, and try to draw it out yourself. Okay? It's probably going to be a train wreck, and that's okay. Then you open your book, check yourself, use a different color ink, and fill in all the things you got wrong. Okay? Study it 5 more minutes. Now get a blank piece of paper, close your book, do it again. Okay? Check yourself, fill in the things you missed. Do that 3 or 4 times in a row, like in a 1-hour period. And then you will notice that each time you do it, you drastically reduce how many things you've omitted. So maybe the first time I reproduced it, I omitted 12 things that I needed on there. Maybe by the last time I did it, I was down to 3. And so that's how you memorize a chart or a diagram. And then do it every day. Keep doing it every day to keep it fresh in your mind. Memory is context dependent. So if you're in Dr. Spivey's block, he will talk to you about a study that was done where humans had to memorize facts underwater in scuba gear. And then when they tried to recall those same facts on land, they really struggled with it. But when they went back underwater in their scuba gear, they could recall them again because that was the context in which they had memorized them. And so you may not be able to study in the classroom in which you take the test in the same context, but you can at least mimic the conditions in which you might take the test. So what I mean by that is, instead of studying and learning the content, laying on your stomach in a prone position on your soft bed, try at least sitting up in the same position at a hard surface like a desk or a table or a carrel or something like that. So you're at least mimicking the conditions in which you will have to recall that information. Using multiple senses. At the very least, if you're reading your textbook, read it out loud. That way you're not only using your sense of sight, you're also using your sense of hearing as you listen to yourself orally reading it. If you want to maximize that, engage your sense of taste and your sense of smell. One of the smartest students I knew at Bethel, who's in a PhD program now, did this and taught me this. She would designate a different flavor of gum, or you could use mints or Tic Tacs for each class, each semester. Just be careful you don't mix them up. Maybe write it inside the textbook cover, which flavor it's supposed to be. And so then she would chew that flavor of gum each time she was in that class, each time she studied for that class, and each time she took the test. Or even you could just do this for the one class that you know is going to be the hardest one for you, even if you don't do it for the others. And so what happens is the neurons in your brain that you used while you were studying will fire again during the exam because your brain remembers the association, that sense of taste and that sense of smell. So try to use multiple senses. Test preparation. Teach the ideas to somebody else. If you don't remember anything else that I say today, I want you to remember these top 2 bullet points and write them down. If these are the only 2 things you implement in your study routine, please do that. The highest form of learning is when you can teach the concepts to somebody else. So I would recommend seeing if you could FaceTime your grandma or your mom a couple times a week and try to recreate the lecture that you just had from your notes and say it to them. They're probably not even going to know if you get it right or not. And that's okay, but just the act of attempting to say that information and teach that information is going to solidify it for you. And so that's how you know that you know that you know that you know it, is when you can teach it to somebody else. That's why tutors get really, really good between when they start tutoring maybe as a sophomore and by the time they're a senior. Some of those concepts are so solidified for them that they're just extremely fluent at it. The second thing I would encourage you to implement in your routine is learn to create practice tests. This is a great way to study. It's a way to analytically look at the material and say, what does my professor value? What is my professor likely to test on? And then create a sample question out of that. For those of you who are social learners and want to study in a group, I don't recommend group study sessions normally, but this would be the one circumstance under which I would. And that would be 4 people are going to come together. They each come prepared with 4 copies of a practice test that they've written, and they're going to take it together as a group and discuss it, and then they're going to each take each other's. So you're going to take 4 practice tests by the time you're done with that study session, one created by each member of the group. As far as preparing for the test, most students tend to focus most of their study time on the things that they just don't get at all. So if you think of it in terms of a category of the things that you know really well versus the things that you know kind of well versus the things that you don't know at all. What you want to do is focus on that middle category, the things that you kind of know, and move them to the category of things you know super well. You're far better off if you know 70% of the material extraordinarily well than if you know 100% of the material so-so. Okay? Cramming will never put it in your long-term memory, but daily review will. Let's talk about test taking tips. You want to skim the whole test before you start so that alerts your brain to what topics you're going to need to pull from. It also lowers test anxiety because it gives you something productive to do while it doesn't demand any recall from you yet. So that helps make the exam a little less menacing. It's important to read the question a second time before you try to generate an answer, because if you just read it once, your brain is going to probably default to the most familiar looking response, which may or may not be correct. Try to generate your own answer before you read the choices. For those of you who cram, you're going to want to, as soon as you get your test, flip it over and do what we call a brain dump or a mind dump. And that's where you just dump everything out on the paper that you think might be on the test while it's still in your short-term memory, so that when you're half an hour into the test and you need to know, you can flip that paper over and look for what you wrote. As you were skimming the test, it was a good idea to circle words like not or never, which change the entire meaning of the question. I would also recommend checking your answers at the end of each page rather than at the end of the test. That will increase the likelihood you're going to catch more mistakes. When you've read the question, if you're somebody who often accidentally picks the wrong thing as you're moving from the test to the Scantron, you just pick the wrong letter. What you can do to reduce that is, let's say it's letter C for number 12. As you're on the test, just lightly touch your pencil or finger to it and say quietly in your mind, C. And then go over to the Scantron. And then just doing that will reduce the chance that you're going to bubble in the wrong letter. Skip the difficult questions initially, starting with what you know. You don't want to realize when you're done that all the stuff you knew was on the last half of the test and all the stuff you didn't know was on the first half, and that you spent all your time on the first half attempting to answer things you didn't know, and the stuff you did know that you could have answered, you never got to. So that will help you have time to answer things you could have gotten right if you had enough time. Confidence rating scale is a really good technique, especially for nursing students. If you're in nursing, you're going to have to take some really hard tests starting your sophomore year, all through your senior year, and this is a good technique for you. So in the margin of your test, rate your confidence in the answer that you picked from 1 to 5. 1 being, I have no clue, and 5 being, I know that I know that I know this. Okay? And so then, if you only have 5 minutes left to check that 50-question test, all you have to do is look at the margins. Don't go back to anything that you rated a 5, that you were super confident you picked the right answer. Maybe don't even go back to the 1s, because you probably still don't know. You probably want to focus, if you're out of time, focus on the things that you rated a 3, that you kind of could have gone either way, because maybe your brain's had enough time to work out the answer now. So a confidence rating scale can be a good technique when you're taking a test.
One of the most helpful tips I learned this year as a freshman was to take frequent breaks while studying. You can study for 45, 48 minutes, or an hour and a half, however long works for you, but make sure to take breaks in between those chunks of time so that you kind of can give your brain a break and do something else for a little bit and then come back so you study a little bit better.
Okay, let's talk about some writing and editing hacks. Oftentimes I hear from students that I just can't get started. Once I get going, I get in the zone and it flows really well, but I just can't get started. So what I would say to you, if you're that student, is make a list of bullet points about everything you know about the topic, then a bullet point list of everything you wish you knew about the topic, and then a bullet point list of everything you want your reader to feel or how you want them to respond upon reading your paper. And usually if you do that, that will get your juices flowing so that you're able to begin to put together some structure. Also, in terms of the sequence of your paper, if you're writing a persuasive paper that has 3 main points, rank them. What is your strongest, most compelling argument? What is your weakest argument? Okay? So you want to lead with the one that's right dead in the middle. Okay? Follow that by your weakest point. You want to sandwich it in the middle and then close with your strongest point as you're coming into the conclusion of your paper. Now, a couple editing tips. A post-draft outline is a great idea. I would encourage you to do a pre-draft outline as well, but I know a lot of students are opposed to doing outlines. But what I would say is if you're having trouble editing your own draft, this might be a good technique. So even if you're not going to do a pre-draft, write your first draft, and then from that draft, make this outline. And then you can analyze your own draft from the outline. That will really reveal things. Like, did you spend way too much time on this and not enough time on this? Did you go off on a bunch of rabbit trails that had no relevance? How was the sequence of ideas? And so if you got off track, you can edit your outline, and then you can use that as a roadmap for editing your next draft of your paper. And then my last point on editing is, this is my favorite. This is where you get to use those highlighters. So you want to read through your paper and think through what are all the major ideas. However many major ideas you have, assign each of them a color of highlighter. Print off your paper and then highlight every sentence in there that falls under one of those categories. And then look and see, are you having the same colors appearing in a paragraph? Because a paragraph should be all yellow or all blue. But if you have one sentence that's yellow in a paragraph and one sentence that's blue and another that's orange, then your paper is probably not structured really well. It needs to be reorganized to group your information by its color. So if you're a very visual learner, particularly in terms of colors, this might be a good editing technique for you to try. Did you know that students who attend class regularly score nearly a full letter grade higher than those who attend with less regularity? Go to class. If you like studying with music, and many college students do, I think we all know that you're not supposed to study to music with lyrics, okay? So save Taylor Swift's new album for your car rides. But what I would say is beyond the just music without lyrics, try downloading video game soundtracks and movie soundtracks. Not only do they not have lyrics to distract you, by their very nature, they're designed to be background music. They're designed not to distract from the action on the screen, and so they're less likely to distract you when you're studying. I would also encourage you to look on the Bethel University Learning Commons Facebook page. We post study tips every week. You can scroll back through for the last several years, in fact, and find all kinds of tips like these and many, many others. And then my last tip would be that you want to enter your professor's office hours into your calendar so that you know when they're available. I often am telling students you need to go see your professor during office hours, and they very rarely do. And a lot of that is, I think, because it's too much effort to look up in the syllabus and see when their office hours are, especially if their office isn't in a location which the student walks by frequently. So if you put their office hours in the front of your planner or in the front of your textbook or something like that, so that you know when help is available, then you can take advantage of that.
Talk to faculty and to your professors. Don't be afraid of sending another email with another question or stopping into someone's office hours to have a quick chat before a test. It's a sign of initiative on your end that I guarantee will serve you well in your academic career. Plus, Bethel faculty and professors want to see you succeed. They're there to help you succeed. So take advantage of the experience and resources they offer.